Hello, welcome to this video on how to trigger a no-self experience, or how to work progressively towards it. Well, isn't that contradictory? Yes, it is, and I did that on purpose, and throughout this video you will learn the reason why I did that. In this video we'll talk about some preliminary concepts. You shouldn't be seeking for a trigger, that you can find no-self experience just everywhere, and that you can better work progressively towards them than trying to seek for this trigger. Alright, so first understanding some preliminary concepts. We need to have the same understanding, right, in order to communicate effectively. And even if you have some different associations with the concepts that I'm discussing here, that's perfectly fine. As long as you know how I'm thinking about it, then you can better comprehend or understand the message that I'm trying to convey. Alright, so the first, objective and subjective reality. Reality means everything that is now, something that's actually happening now, not yesterday, not tomorrow, but now. Objective means it's independent of the mind. Its existence is not requiring a mind. On the contrary, subjective means that it's dependent of the mind. So objective reality means everything that's actual, that is independent of the mind, and subjective reality means everything that is depending on a mind. So, for instance, an example of subjective reality is saying that is a beautiful car. Well, beauty, of course, is subjective. It's created by a mind. Without a mind evaluating the beauty of something, there is no beauty. So that's something subjective. Next, the self. We're talking here about the no-self experiences, so it's important to understand what are we talking about actually, what is this self? If you look up in the freedictionary.com, which I value highly, you will find this, and I quote it, one's consciousness of one's own being or identity, the ego. So identity is subjective, just like with beauty, it's something that is an outcome of mental processes. You need a mind to perform identification. So you might think that you, or the image that you have of yourself, objectively exists, but if you probe it, you will find that nothing really holds. Nothing is really true. The self is part of the subjective reality, and the subjective reality lies within our power to change, because our mind is the origin of our subjective reality. As we've just seen, subjective reality requires a mind to exist. So that makes our mind the source. So by changing our mind, we are changing our subjective reality, and everything that we experience is subjective. It can't be an objective experience, because someone else's experience is very likely to be different, although they might be almost like identical or the same, or you really understand each other and you think you're talking about the same thing. Everyone's experience is like unique. It's something subjective. So by changing our mind, we change our subjective reality, and if the self is created by our own mind, if we create our mind around this self-identification, then we change it. So this image I wanted to show, because what do you see? You see a beach, and a beach is like a no forest experience. It's kind of a joke, but I also think it holds true, because if you think about it, a no-self experience is not something on its own. It's not like a unique state, or it's something that you can achieve or attain, or something that's always the same. Just like this is a no forest experience, it's also a no racing track experience, because you see a beach. And with the no self, that's kind of the same idea. And you shouldn't be seeking for a trigger. The first, and I think is the most important, is triggering implies a Boolean state. And a Boolean state is, for instance, you either have success of no self or failure, and if you have enough failures you will find frustrated because you want to get somewhere and it's not working out for you. And in order for something to be triggered, it must exist. So let's take a very simple example, the example of an alarm. If an alarm is there, you can trigger it and you can hear the sound of the alarm. If you don't trigger it, it's silent, the alarm is not going off. So in order to trigger something, it must be there. But what are we talking about actually? We are talking about the absence of self-identification. We're talking about absence of ego, about absence of self. How can you trigger something that is absent? So in a logical sense, it doesn't make any sense actually to trigger a no-self experience, because there is really nothing to trigger. So as I said in the beginning of the slides, I can go back, or work progressively towards it. Well, that's what we're going for, because if you see results of the work that you're doing, that's motivating, and you see progress. It's not a Boolean state, you see incremental progress, and that's what we're aiming for, because that keeps you going. All right, let's get back. Do not seek for yourself. So just like the forest image, you can find no-self everywhere. If you're fully focused on racing track in a kart, and you're really focusing on how to corner, when to put on the throttle, when to brake, how the tires skid on the tracks, you're not performing self-evaluations. So you could say that this is a no-self experience, because all your focus, all your senses are pointed towards getting that kart over the tracks as fast as possible. So you can find no-self everywhere. Riding the bicycle, walking through the park, playing with your kids, working with your colleagues, you can find no-self everywhere. It's not some special state, as I said. And the absence of self, why would you even want to go for a state that has no self? Well, because the absence of the self is just one handicap less to work with reality, because the self, if you believe it objectively exists, is an illusion. If the self, and you know it, that you are creating it, like you fully know it, then it's no longer an illusion, because you know how it's working, you know what you are doing. But if you think that the self objectively exists, it's an illusion, and illusions are not required to work with reality. On the contrary, illusions form handicaps to work with reality, and working with reality relates to happiness. If you can do things with ease, everything is going well, and it makes you more happy, right? Let me turn off this sound for now. Sorry for that. All right. So how are we going to work progressively towards the state of no self? First, there are a few things to understand. Then we'll go over the meditation exercise, and then I will give a practical example of how I would perform the meditation. First, some things to understand. A lot of people think that meditation is doing nothing, but on the contrary, meditation requires focus. It requires discipline, I wouldn't say, because if you're motivated, you don't need discipline, you just do it because you like it. So meditation is definitely not doing nothing, and I would like to rephrase, or I would like to say that meditation is learning to control information processing that is performed by your mind. So instead of your mind doing all these things subconsciously, automatically, you gain control and you put your mind to evaluate, to perform information processing, because you think that's what you need. At least for me, that's always the end goal of meditation. Well, getting relaxed also, but mainly getting in control of information processing. And another thing that I think is key that we will see in the meditation exercises is, for information to be processed, we need change. Everything in the world changes around us. If you consult Buddhism, then nothing persists and everything changes always, only the rate varies. You can see that in computers. Computer chips oscillate like a computer chip of 3 gigahertz, and the brain of the human being, or any animal in that respect, also oscillates like between almost 0 to like 40 hertz or something. And what we also need for information processing is contrast. That's what we're going to use in the meditation exercise. We need contrast, because the higher the contrast, the clearer the perception. Think of it as these black characters on this white background. I chose black, well, it's by default, of course. There's black by default, because then it's high contrast and it's easy to perceive. If these characters, these letters, were almost white, only a tad different from the background, you wouldn't be able to see them, or very, very difficult. So that's what we need in our meditation exercise. We need contrast. So what do we need contrast between is Well, the two concepts that you're going to switch, I always call this the switching meditation, and I switch between things every 1 or 3 seconds, and I really need to put my mind to it. I can't be lazy, I just put on and I force myself to keep switching between the two and not get lost in one of the other. And what happens is, just like your eyes and your brain switch between the white background and the black characters on the screen, you get to read the text and you can put that in formation, literally, and you create from this data some information which you can understand. So that's what we need in a meditation exercise. That's why we switch, to increase this contrast, because then it becomes clear, more clear, more clear, more clear, and then you will get a stronger sense and better understanding of what's going on. And we need that because a lot of this self-identification, a lot of this ego, is subconscious. And the moment you sit down, like with meditation, you often sit down, do nothing else, you get to see parts and pictures that your subconscious mind is creating. And because you keep on switching, you start to see that a lot of those things you are actually creating yourself. Now consider this, if you are not aware that you are doing something, but you experience something from it, but you initiated this yourself, but you're not aware, you may probably think or experience this as an objective source. So something that lies outside of you. But the moment that you see that you are actually doing it yourself, and a further stage, you can just stop it. Or at an even further stage, you choose to not even start it, it becomes a game changer, it becomes a life changer. You change your subjective reality. First, when you notice that you're doing something that you don't want, that you created, your subjective reality is altered. But if you don't even start it, then your subjective reality is different from the beginning. And that's exactly what we need for this no-self experience. And here I'll go quickly over the meditation exercise that I would do in this topic of a no-self experience. I always pick bodily sensations as a focal point because my body tells me when I'm tense and when my mind is wandering. So I always pick one thing is bodily sensations. And I tell myself, like, this is the sensations of the body. Then next I switch to ego. And how do you get a sensation of ego? How do you get those mental processes running for ego? Compare yourself to someone else. Compare yourself to your siblings, to your neighbor, to your colleague, to your old you, to whatever. Or ask yourself the question, what defines me? Or what would other people think of me? Or how would other people see me? That all requires self-identification processes to run in your mind. And that's the goal. You want them to run in your mind, but only for a short while. You can cut them in the middle if your thoughts are not done yet. It doesn't really matter. After those 1 or 3 seconds or whatever feels comfortable, you just switch back to your bodily sensations and you keep on doing that. And let me remind you, we do this because we want to increase the contrast between the two. And with high contrast, we see what we are doing. And because the self is created by ourselves, we get to see that we actually create it ourselves when the contrast is high enough. So if I focus on this, I maybe do it 5 or 10 minutes or 20 minutes or maybe 40 minutes, whatever feels comfortable. I can maybe do it daily or weekly or once a month, or I have other topics to meditate on also. Anyway, so this is the meditation exercise. And then I would like to finish with just a few more words. This switching meditation can be applied not only to learning to experience more no-self experiences in life, but it can be used for anything. Let me first just quickly say something about my own experience of this no-self. Whenever I focused on this meditation, what happens is that during the day, some subconscious process is running. I compare myself to a colleague or how I'm performing to how my colleague is performing, and then I realize this is actually ego. This is this self-created image, and I don't need that. If I then look into it, and what does it bring me? Do I actually want to think of this? Do I want to think about this? Or no, I'd rather enjoy the weather or look towards the fun things that we're going to do in the weekends or whatever, and I free myself of this subconscious process of the ego. And that lessens and lessens all these selfish acts in life and makes you a more enjoyable person for the people around you, also a more true person of what you really are. Alright, to come back to this slide, you can apply the switching meditation to basically anything. Imagine that you're anxious during a meeting with colleagues, and at that moment you don't know why, and the meeting is over, you're driving towards home, and you think about it, and in that moment you experience the same anxiety again. What you can do is you pick this image of this meeting with your colleagues about this anxiety, and then you let go, you relinquish, you go back to the focus of your body, and you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and at some moment you will notice that when this feeling of anxiety arises, that the question that is evaluated in your mind is, what would they think of me at this moment? Would they judge me? What do they think of my performance, or what do they think of this or that? Which yields the anxious experience, this anxious emotion, which you first didn't see. But if you switch between them, keep switching, the contrast increases, you every time get to see a little bit more of the differences, and it becomes more clear to you. The second line, I used this once, no, not once, like several times I used this to lose the sense of spatial awareness, and that was really cool. That was really cool in my experience. Alright, so what I did, I was focusing on just the spatial awareness around me, like I'm experiencing the space of this room. Even though I have my eyes closed, I still think that this keyboard is in front of me and this monitor, etc. And then I focus back to the bodily sensation. I tell myself this is the body, and I go back to spatial, and I tell myself the spatial awareness is created by the mind, because I don't see it, I don't feel it, I don't hear it. This spatial awareness is created by the mind. And I switch back, and I keep switching, and like, let's say after 15 minutes of switching, sounds more difficult than it is, because I said your subconscious mind picks up this, it gains momentum of its own. I got to see that this spatial awareness, when I think about it, it comes on so quickly that it seems objective reality, but at some moment I experience I'm actually creating this spatial awareness myself. And I could stop it, and whoosh, all that was there was just me. Because I didn't experience that I was sitting in a room, I only experienced me and nothing else. Spatial awareness was gone. So in that respect, I've proven for myself that space, like in space-time, is subjective. Space doesn't objectively exist. My mind is the source for the experience of space. And a funny thing, that's a completely different topic. My daughter once said to a tangerine that it was an orange. And I was like, this is the exact same principle. My daughter didn't get to see them both a lot of times, so she really can't tell the difference. So how would I learn her to see the difference is by keeping up an orange and say, this is the orange. And then keeping up the tangerine and say, this is the tangerine. And if I do it very quickly, she of course wouldn't see the differences. But if I do it like slowly, every 2 or 3 seconds, I switch and I tell, just like with the meditation exercise, bodily experiences, spatial awareness, or bodily experiences, or self-identification, or bodily experience, or anxiety experience from meeting, or bodily experience, or whatever. Tangerine, orange. That is how I would teach my daughter the difference between the two, and that's exactly the same that we're using as a very simple technique to teach ourselves the differences between something. Doesn't really matter. And a last thing that I would like to say is, I believe that consciousness is like equal to the number of bits that a computer can process. Just like a 64 bits computer can process more complex information than a 32-bit computer can. That's the reason why you have 64 these days. The same with your mind. The more you can split things into like smaller buckets, the more control you gain over navigating your reality. And this switching, first it might seem like a big bucket, but if you start switching, you split these buckets, your consciousness grows, you create more bits CPU of your mind, if you will. Alright, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned it. I hope you're definitely not disappointed because you were seeking for a trigger of a no-self experience. And I truly, truly hope that you understand that working progressively towards a more no-self experiences in life is much more rewarding than keep on seeking for years and years and years for this trigger of this no-self experience that will likely maybe never come, or maybe just a few times in your life, which are like great epiphanies, and you should value them if you experience them, but they come by themselves if you work for it. If you work for it. So work progressively towards letting go of those self-identification processes that you perform with your mind. Train yourself to see that it is you that is performing those evaluations, and you can let them go, and you free up your mind to have a more joyful life every day, week, month, year, whatever your progress might be. Alright, thanks for watching, and maybe till the next time.